rated tools in most of the Adobe programs. It's most prevalent in Illustrator, but it's also used in InDesign and Photoshop. To use the pen tool to draw a straight line, you simply click where you want your straight line to start and click where you want it to stop. The area between the two clicks is called a segment. Where you've actually made the clicks are called anchor points. So you can just carry on making more and more segments to your path until you either go back to your starting point, at which point you see a circle around the nib of the pen, and once you click, you know that you've closed your path. So you just click where you want it to start, you click where you want it to stop. Another way of starting a new path is simply to go back to your pen tool, click on that, and once more you're ready to make paths. If you want to make paths or lines that are perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical, click where you want it to start, hold down the Shift key, bring your pointer to more or less a horizontal plane, and give another click, and your Shift key will constrain your path to be perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical or perfectly 45 degrees, as long as your pen is in approximately that position. The only time it doesn't work is when you're closing a path. So when you're closing a path, it makes no difference if you hold down the Shift key or not. The path will actually close. Well, so much for drawing straight lines. But what about curves? Well, curves are the thing that seems to confound most people. The trick when drawing curves is to visualize in which direction the curve is going to bump. So in other words, if we look at curve A over here, we can see that it's actually bumping in an upward direction. So the trick is to go to the first point of the curve, click and drag in the direction you want your curve to go. The length of that drag should be roughly 1/3 of the curve. You then come to the end of the curve and click and drag in the opposite direction. What you then have are direction points, direction lines, and a segment in between the two anchor points. If you click on your selection tool and then click away, you'll see that the direction points and lines disappear, and all you're left with is a curve, which is what you want. So what happens when you have more complex curves like this? Well, once again, you click and drag in the direction that you want your curve to go. Come back to the next point and click and drag in the opposite direction. Now, because I clicked in a downward direction over here, the next curve is automatically going to bend downwards. So if I come to point 3 and click and drag, as you can see, my next curve has come down rather than up. Because I've clicked and dragged up at that point, my next curve is going to be in an upward direction, and when I click and drag in the opposite direction, that's exactly what I get. Once again, because I clicked and dragged downwards the last time, when I click and drag upwards, that curve is going to go down, but the next one is going to bump up. So I can just click and drag to finish that off. Well, that's fine, but what about if I want them all to curve in the same direction? Well, once again, as I did before, I looked at this curve in one segment at a time. So here my first segment's going to bump up, so I click and drag in an upward direction, and then I click and drag down. Now, if I were to come across to this point over here, my curve would automatically be dropping in a downward direction. I don't want that to happen though. I want it to curve upwards. So what I have to do is tell the computer that I actually want to change direction. And the way I do that is to hold down the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac, bring my pointer right on top of that anchor point, And you can see when it's on top of the anchor point by the inverted V that sits right next to my nib. And then I click and drag in the direction I want my next curve to go. I then release my Alt or Option key, come to the next point along, and click and drag in the opposite direction. Once again, I have to change directions by holding down the Alt Option key, click and drag in an upward direction, come to my next point, click and drag in a downward direction. Once again, change direction, hold down the Alt or Option key, click and drag up, and then click and drag down. Once again, Alt Option key, click and drag up, and then click and drag down. Well, so much for curves. What if we want to mix curves and straight lines? Well, over here we have curves going in opposite directions as well as straight lines. Well, once again, the trick is to look at it one segment at a time. The first segment is a curve going in an upwards direction. So I click and drag in an upwards direction and then click and drag down, and that draws my curve. I now want to change from curves to straight lines, and to do that, remember, to draw a straight line, you click where you want it to start and you click where you want it to stop. So I'm going to click where I want my straight line to start, and then holding down the Shift key to constrain it to the horizontal, I'll click where I want it to end. I now want to draw a curve, so I click and drag down because my curve's going down, and then come to the next point along and click and drag in an upward direction. My next segment is going to be horizontal again, so once more I give a click where I want it to start, hold down the Shift key to constrain, click where I want it to end. This time my curve is going up, so I click and drag in an upward direction, and then I click and drag down. Now, of course, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to want to draw this type of curve all the time, but it's incredibly useful if, for example, you want to trace a logo, which is something we need to do pretty much all the time in Illustrator. Well, to do that, you simply make a new file like this, and you place your logo. I'm going to put it in as a template and place it so it comes in like that, and all I need to do now is use my pen tool to first of all zoom in on my whole logo. Whoops, that was a little bit too vigorous there. And I can simply start drawing curves as we've just shown. It's filling in with color, which is something I don't really need at the moment, so we can just carry on going like that, and so on. So not only is it useful in Illustrator, it's also fantastically useful in Photoshop, and I'll show you how that works. Over here is a photo of an old van I took in a place called Lightning Ridge. Now what I wanted to do with this photo is actually select the van itself and turn the background into black and white, so desaturate the background. Now, as you could see, if you're a Photoshop user, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do with most of the selection tools, but with my pen tool, it's fairly easy. Works exactly the same as it does in Illustrator. I just start tracing around it and drawing curves, just like I did in Illustrator. And once I've done the whole thing, I can just come along to my paths panel, click on turn the paths into a selection, and that turns the whole thing into a selection. So I hope I've convinced you to use the pen tool. It is a fantastically useful tool. If you'd like some templates, please just send me an email and I'll be happy to send templates to you for you to trace around. Thanks for watching.